Well, thank you, Kevin. That was very kind, and I appreciate it very much. Alice and I have really, we're really enjoying teaching here. Gotten a great, warm reception from faculty and students alike. And yes, again, thank you very much. And it's particularly nice because, as Kevin, you already know, Kevin was a classmate of Alice and mine. David Heyman actually was a TA at one point, and Wilfred was one of my, well, you weren't actually my studio professor, but it seemed like you were. So yeah, it kind of feels like it's a sort of a return, so that's been fun. Now, in terms of the practice that Alice and I run, it's been one of our goals from the time that we started to really work in the social realm as much as possible, and in the many guises that social realm takes. So the question of how to address the heterogeneous culture or cultures that make up our cities, and how to define social institutions through architecture within those cities, that's been a major driving force in the development of our work. It's also one of the reasons that we moved to LA in the first place, where not only offers but usually demands some kind of response to these sorts of complex questions. But it's easy to get distracted by the dizzying amount of architectural and design images that fly around the globe, pretty much 24/7 in today's global culture. There's so many approaches: sculptural, data-driven, diagrams, surface, parametrics, minimalism. So how do you stay grounded, and how do you stay focused on your values? So now for Alice, she finds a refuge in literature and to a certain degree technology, but for me it's art. It's really art. And since I'm the one giving the lecture tonight, that's where I'm going to start. So she might have something else to say, but and that's not to say that there's not an amazing amount of architecture and architectural installations, especially these days. But what I love about looking at art, besides that's produced a lot faster than architecture, is that the best of it is so multi-layered, offering cultural critiques, material innovation, formal experimentation, all at the same time in intense packages. So first off is this work by Chris Burton called The Medusa's Head, and right off you can see it has a powerful presence with its dark, weighty, meteor-like shape. And when you get closer to it, though, you realize that there's a real strong message there, namely that we humans are strangling ourselves and the earth with our technology and greed. Now, equally serious is this installation by Robert Gober back in the 90s, and I think here it's a kind of you're not sure what's going on. It's both sensuous and dry, light and heavy. There's some maybe sense of loss here, the body and the environment. It's not really clear, but again, the point here is that in this space, it forces you to think and to delve deeper. In a much lighter kind of art, much more ethereal, is the work of Sarah Z, though still packed with commentary, cultural commentary. And we like her for her humor and her site specificity. This is called Second Means of Egress. And you can see the piece is trying to get out of the room through the skylight above. Or commanding a larger urban environment, really engaging with the city, are these two fountains in Chicago at the Millennium Park. Interactive and fun. Likewise is Anish Kapoor's Being nearby, but in a more personal and in some ways intense way. And then finally are these these projections, video projections by Doug Aitken, in this case at the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. They're colorful, digital, they're flat, but they're full of content, and again, they really engage with their surroundings. You cannot avoid them. So some of these ideas, so you can see how some of these ideas come into play in this. Actually, just this. It's a women's bathroom in a nightclub we did a while back. And of course, we all know that nightclubs are about seeing and being seen. And here the idea was to use kind of humor and denial to sort of challenge or to make aware of this kind of culture of beauty and narcissism that takes place, that's really what a nightclub is about. So, of course, in the women's bathroom, in the one place where you would expect to find a mirror, right above the sink, it's all you find is this brick wall and a rusty old nail. So the idea, and then further back, now you're in the hallways looking through clear acrylic doors, you can actually see both of the women's and the men's bathroom. And here again, it was to sort of reinforce but confuse that idea of kind of voyeurism and narcissism. And I think here you can imagine that we were really intrigued or fascinated by this image from the movie Paris, Texas many years ago. I don't know, you guys are all probably too young to have seen it, but the main character, played by Harry Dean Stanton, has been looking for his estranged wife, and he's finally found her in this peep show. And it's, well, what I was going to say was that these kinds of projects for us were much more material-driven than form-driven. And so this had a particular fascination through, because he finds his wife in this peep show, and she's looking at him through this one-way mirror. But what's interesting is, by this image, is that on one hand, by laying his image over hers, it kind of reconnects him to his estranged wife. But at the same time, the reflection, it actually seems to kind of distance him even further. So we're always interested, to some degree, in that kind of psychological happenings of space and how space affects the way people think and behave. And further out from those restrooms, which you see in blue, the restrooms are clad in blue acrylic mirror. But further out, there's another partition of translucent polycarbonate. And then out on the dance floor, you can see now 2 or 3 layers removed from the original restrooms. You can see the dance floor and this whole palette of materials that are designed to present and represent the body in as many ways as possible, different kinds of reflective, colorful, translucent, clear materials. And it's just kind of worth noting here that, and I note this because we've done a lot of renovations, and actually sometimes we're called in because people sort of like the way we handle them, that even though the spaces are kind of, seem kind of continuous and clear from the inside when we're done, they're actually kind of often composed of a number of sort of independent insertions, and it's really how they dialogue with the original and across space with their compatriots that dialogue is a lot of what the space and the design are about. And that's kind of true of this project, which is why it's next. But here, actually, it's actually in a pretty rugged area of South Los Angeles, formerly South Central, the place of a couple well-known social disruptions in the last few decades. And in this case, our client he was raised here, owned a furniture factory that he started, and his concept was to have the showrooms for that factory be in these 2 buildings here. And he wanted to create a pair of showrooms that would really, hopefully, catalyze this whole manufacturing area into turning into like a design district, not unlike the one in Miami, if you're familiar with that. So that was this kind of, this planned idea of the renovation and the improvement of this whole area moving down the street. So these were the buildings that we found ourselves with. They had these these steel reinforcing columns that were put up for seismic reasons in the 80s, and then lots of signage, but not the good kind of signage that you really want to keep. So in this case, we were in South LA, and I have to say, it seems ridiculous now, but we were really sort of nervous about being seen as these kind of overeducated, aesthetes coming down and doing something. We were really worried that we would sort of offend the neighborhood somehow. So we wanted to create something dynamic, and so did our client, but we were very clear not to bring something foreign into the neighborhood that we thought would be not well received. So the strategy we developed really was a kind of to layer the buildings with a new set of light, different kinds of materials that would create a new presence for the buildings, a new kind of close that would seem light and even flexible, even kind of temporary and inclusive. So on the top, whoops, on the top polycarbonate screen we developed to take advantage and in a way kind of camouflage the columns, those columns. The center lines of those columns regulated 2 tones of concrete and these wood panels and the fabric canopy, and then we added these cement board panels out on the front as well. And so we completely transformed the environment. What was a kind of just beatable parking lot turned into sort of a hybrid parking event space. I think you can see here that some of the early work at the nightclub even informed what we did here, which is sort of I think what Kevin was talking about. And the fabric canopy I think was quite important here in terms of creating kind of a presence for this space. Now, our students are probably, or Alice and my students are probably snickering here in some ways because the space doesn't look anything like this anymore. Unfortunately, the improvements didn't march down the street, and this area became sort of a little hard on its heels. But this was the basic way it was started. From across the street, you can see the very direct, almost ad hoc way that we juxtaposed kind of newer elements with the existing elements. We were interested in that dialogue of the existing, the old, and playing even with sort of graphics, but not in a regular as regular signage. Here's the polycarbonate screen again, kind of cantilevered over at the corner by the front. And for our client, it was a very difficult decision to even put the fence up. He wanted it to be very transparent and very open to the neighborhood, but he was also, having grown up there and knowing what he did as a kid, very, very nervous about that. So the fence went in, but with the material that was kind of interesting, strong, but transparent, reasonably transparent. We designed this gate such that even when it's closed with these overlapping, interlocking eaves, it seems more open than a typical gate when it's just closed through vertical posts. And we also designed as kind of Kevin mentioned in some ways, and part of this is how you start a practice. Lots of times you start a practice, we actually contracted a lot of these things, such as the door. It's really one of my favorite things that we've done. Just interlocking panels woven together like the fabric on the canopy to a certain extent, and you see it on the interior. So this was the kind of main reception area into the showrooms. So we learned a lot, about this. As we moved on, we wouldn't ever be sort of worried about what neighborhood we would be in. We knew that if we did good work, then it would be received well. And so while Cisco, our client, opened his space to the community, and had public events there, it was very successful. And while all the other sort of buildings continued getting tagged and graffitied, this building kind of stayed nice and clean. So getting back into Santa Monica, much more well-to-do community in terms of economic stratification for sure. The next project is a house on this nice green site. And here our client was very concerned about sustainability. And this was about 10 years ago, so it's kind of ahead of the curve a little bit. And so we immediately started thinking, long, skinny houses, so lots of penetration, solar penetration, lots of natural ventilation. But sometimes your site and your program don't really cooperate, and that the size of the house that he wanted wouldn't really fit. So we ended up with this kind of scheme, which is more like an L wrapping around kind of a garage. But even with a scheme like that, and you can kind of see these public spaces wrapping around this garage, we were concerned that we're not getting enough air and light into the house, particularly from the south. What we kind of discovered in this project, which really, I think taught us a lot moving forward, was that it's not so bad to have a big, thick house. And what we did was we kind of distributed the masses on the first 2 floors to create what a diagonal section. You usually don't, cut your sections like that. Usually, but cutting diagonally through here, we were able to distribute them to create what we call this diagonal void in the house, where air and light would flow. You can see it here, and that void really starts at this point here, and the light kind of travels through from the inside. And then we also tested it with the solar studies to make sure that it would in fact penetrate. And this is kind of the result at one particular time of day. So looking towards that kind of void, you can see it's not really so much like a pure kind of void, a pure space, but really more of a layered space that one would kind of look through on one's way towards the sky. And so, but we were just taken by this idea, from then on, that we didn't have to make every building element the width of the room. That there was a real strength to carving a house or carving any building and letting the light pass through in unconventional ways, and even creating those relationships within those buildings. So, for instance, looking up now, here you can actually see the void is a little more pure than I showed before. These two, this is out of order, but anyway, so that one thing we were taken by was at the top of the stairs after it wraps around this kind of garage, is that you're looking down into the building at the same time that you're looking out over it. And I guess I'm missing the slide, but that's okay. And then the main living spaces are sort of, in some ways, kind of felt carved into the space. And here you can see it from the long elevation facing north, where we weren't really concerned about sun penetration and sort of blocking that for heat gain issues. Now, 10 years later, there's another little lesson, which is be nice to your clients, because they may want to hire you, or they may have another project later on for you to do. And actually, I'm pretty happy we've made good friends with a lot of our clients. But 10 years later, our client bought the property next door and wanted to put in a guest house and a large and a yard, a bigger kind of play yard for his family. So it's kind of a nice position to be in. And the interesting thing here was that this elevation was never supposed to be seen. It was just the side elevation, had bamboo. You were never going to see it. But now this was the elevation that you would kind of expect it to be more like this elevation, and you would like come right out into the yard. So that was kind of an issue. And the other thing that was sort of interesting was that the client, he hated this Tuscan house here. And he didn't want to see it from his property. So whereas this house we tried to make a big house look small. In this house, in this property we tried to make a small house look big, and there was no reason for it to be 2 stories except for that reason. It cost like it was. Anyway, it was. So what was kind of interesting though was with no real front here, no real way to address this yard, we did something where instead of fronting the building onto the street, we kind of rotated the building such that this would be the front for the yard. And but then also we added these angles so that it would actually turn a little bit back towards the street, still acknowledging that street. So you can see how that frontality kind of works here, where you're just coming around from the side of the house. The pool is kind of an elbow that connects the 2 yards. There's a photovoltaic trellis over here. In some ways, this was the thin house that we had kind of wanted to build originally. But also, we still sort of were interested in this kind of carving. And so we had more mass than we actually needed, actual interior space. So it allowed us to carve elements out like this, which you can see again here, and this was part of the main reason we actually built this structure in the first place, which was for our owners, not just the yard and the pool, but actually so he could have an office away from his noisy children. And then here were sort of the interior spaces that that were actually created by cutting this sort of triangular notch, carving this notch out of that end, and sort of the dynamic kind of qualities that resulted. Now, the next project, this was really Alice's project. So, LA City of Innovation. There's a second largest book fair in the world is in Guadalajara. And every year they pick a guest of honor. The guest of honor is usually a country. That country brings entertainment. So it's very smart. They bring all their best dancers and singers and to Guadalajara. And they also, the country also designs this main, it's about a triangular, about 15,000 square foot pavilion area right in the center of the convention center where the book fair occurs. So when Alice heard books, architecture, she was, we gotta get that project. So it was a competition run by the City of LA and the National Endowment for the Arts. But she was, hell-bent on getting this project because it involved books and architecture. So, and I think one of the reasons we did eventually win it is that we didn't kind of have a standard, stereotypical idea of what LA is. That's not what we wanted to present. That's not what we wanted to take to Guadalajara, that we were a city of Hollywood and movie stars. But instead that LA is a city of innovation. And that's the innovation that's because of the aerospace industry, which has been centered there for a long time. Caltech is right there in Pasadena. Of course, it does have Hollywood and it does have movie stars, but it also in terms of architecture, art, it's actually it's quite again, it's a kind of a heterogeneous, diverse, complicated city, but and there's a lot going on. So, of course, when one sort of says, well, what is innovation, and how do we have an idea, but what do we design? You've all had that happen, right? So, but we were here. It just became obvious that what we designed would be balloons, and like idea balloons as a kind of representation of innovation. So we developed a Voronoi pattern on the floor. They were within the different cells. We had these sort of low bookshelves that were upholstered like Googie-style diners, which were very popular in LA. And everywhere we had a blank cell, we had a balloon. We also developed this idea of an author wall that would highlight the LA's most famous authors, either who lived there or wrote about LA. Those balloons actually were more complicated to make than one would think, and partly because they weren't just spherical. So we got Burrow Happold, who are well known for their inflatable structures involved. And here you actually see them again. But now, as projects develop, the idea was that we would project films on them. And so initially, Chinatown, what do you think? There's all these, but you can't really show those. So Alice went out and we commissioned, with the money that we've been given, 10 independent filmmakers to make different films that we projected onto those balloons. Along the way, we also decided that the author wall wouldn't just be, text printed on a drape or paper, but that we would project the names, and that became another sort of technological challenge that Alice stepped up for. We also, Cisco, who was the guy who was our client in South LA, he came in. He was born in Mexico, and he wanted to get involved in this. So we also designed these modular kind of prefab movable seating elements. So this is kind of the result. You see the Voronoi down on the floor with the bookshelves and some of the projections. This is actually 1 million people came through here in a week, and these were just kind of taken at nighttime. Here you see it more on an average time, and the organizers said this was the best. I like this. I don't know if it's true or not. Maybe they tell everybody this. They said this was the best pavilion that had been done, and the reason was that it really acted like a plaza. And instead of kind of trying to push this idea of how great LA was, we made an ethereal space that was more atmospheric of what we thought LA was than actually sort of representing particular ideas that we would sort of force on them. So the balloons, the film, even the shelves, and also people, the modular kind of sitting cushions that just moved around. It seemed successful from our point of view, so that was great. Then we also integrated these book towers, we call them. They're sort of based on Mayan pyramids. And now you can really see a kind of close-up of this projected author wall. Again, here, the balloons would actually get pretty low. But the author wall was also interactive. So from this touch screen, kids could, or anybody could go and control the author wall, could control the movement of the names, and then if they touched on one of the names, they could pull up a bio or a quote from that author in English or Spanish. So the kids had a great time with it. Now, speaking of technology, this was another sort of project where we kind of dipped our toes in the more kind of digital design, which these are, a lot of the buildings at Caltech are from the early 1900s, yeah. I think this one's probably about 1930, and it was but it housed the aerospace laboratories for Caltech. So we were hired really to renovate three floors to the inside. And I think, again, this idea of kind of insertions became important for us, and you can kind of get the feeling here that these sort of pieces that we designed were kind of derived from an interest in a study of aerodynamics. And you can argue whether how superficial it is, and all these kinds of things, but we enjoy using at least some of the ideas, maybe some of the direct representational ideas that come from research, but we enjoy having those ideas infused into the work for both just pure pleasure, to inspire the students, the faculty, and so you can kind of see here was a ceiling piece that we designed in the lobby, and it was designed from it's built from a resin called Varia. It's a product called Varia. Two layers of resin with an inner layer of vinyl inner layer that could then be cut. And with openings and patterns so that also we were able to integrate light into those. Back here you can see we were also interested in the transparency between the lobby and people doing research. And so that was a view into this double height lobby here where a scientist develops, he's a kind of expert in space structures, so he's usually building these tall pieces that are hanging in here. There's the view out to the lobby, and another view out into the second floor, which you can see here. This is a teaching lab, and so again, using these forms, but also not always keeping them so pure, but actually transforming them as sort of required to create a desk or something like that. And then lastly, this conference room where we incorporated again, one of the seminal diagrams of a Harmon flow diagram into a felt ceiling that, again, it has great acoustic properties, and it's interesting. It's as simple as that sometimes. We also designed this table that had a lot of documents that they wanted to display, but they didn't have much room. So this kind of glass and plexiglass table has drawers in it, and you can kind of just see one of these documents in that location. It actually turned out to be one of the most popular conference rooms at Caltech, not just for the design, but again for the acoustics. Now later we were selected again at Caltech to renovate this. I said we kind of sort of got known for renovations, to renovate this fortress of a building, which was just mainly an office building, into two wet labs for two often competing sustainability institutes. The Resnick Institute and the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis, JCAP. You can see just how sort of brutal these buildings are. And so the clients, they wanted to bring in more light. They couldn't stand being in the building. They said it was made them depressed. and they needed more space. So on the second floor, I don't know if there was a little terrace, but it was unused. It was also dark. So the idea was to cut these guys off and fill up the space. So we went from this to this. And on the lower floor, again, people would look out the windows and they would get the back of this overhang here, really unpleasant. So we cut those off there in order to create this. So it's always fun to go out to construction sites, especially when they're doing things like this. The structural engineers were very happy that we did this because it lightened the building very appreciably, especially in the places it needed to be lightened. This actually prevented us, or this allowed us to do not as much seismic upgrade for the building. So the backside used to look like this, and with the new curtain wall, we transformed it to this. My father-in-law worked for Mies van der Rohe, and this is the only building that Alice and I ever have done that he's liked. And so I think the curtain wall does it for him. So that was the back side. On the front side, you might have seen that the building was connected, well, it was disconnected from the campus by this bridge. We took out the bridge and designed this entry pavilion, we called it, with a green roof. We also introduced in this location a new stair to connect and bring more interactivity between the floors 1 and 2. I could talk a lot about sustainability. This project did. These were all these issues about sustainability. It did get LEED Platinum. So did that guest house before it was a LEED for Homes Platinum. Could talk a lot about that, but then we really wouldn't have time to talk about much else. And I'm actually much more interested in the sort of spatial and quality of projects than sustainability, which I just think is something that you should do whenever you can. So again, I just wanted to show again this kind of bridge that really disconnected this facility from the campus, and then after adding the atrium, or I'm sorry, the pavilion, it was kind of reconnected. On the inside, we had kind of two major strategies. Around the core, we wrapped these kind of images of a rotating globe, so that I think it's pretty clear. Scientists would again be sort of reminded of their mission. And urgency of that mission. This building gets a lot of visitors and kids on field trips, so they get something out of it as well. The second thing was really the source of all this free energy we're going to have is sunlight. If these guys at the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis get it right, so we kind of wanted to kind of celebrate that with using the visible spectrum as another, the full visible spectrum of the natural light as a kind of a palette for things like furniture and the VCT, an inexpensive way to sort of just have some fun. Each one of the labs, which all had a different mission in this sort of effort, were given a different color. And so just inside this entry pavilion, you can see again, you can see now the globes, the kind of colors that we propose. There's also these screens, which again, they have lots of field trips, kids coming through, and people giving them little talks about what they do in this building. Over here, you can see the stair atrium is not huge, but it still brings down enough natural light to bring natural light, to help to give some borrowed light to this conference room back here. Again, sometimes these thick buildings are actually too thick, particularly when you don't get to design them and you just get a thick building. It's very hard to sort of bring light into a lot of them as the spaces. But again, you see also you can see here the globe as it kind of marches around the core. So, another couple more images of the stair. So, two more things. This is we were invited, again, it's a lot of, Kevin was talking about the differing kind of work. So there was a project manager at Caltech that liked us, and when he became the director of construction out at Claremont McKenna College, he invited us to be in a competition for a project that we had no right doing, which was a large gym. Was supposed to be, at the time, it was supposed to be about 50,000 square feet. So the site was, actually, take this moment. the site here in the square. Beautiful campus, private college, about 40 miles east of downtown. And the building was, existing building was unexceptional and really not worth saving. So for once we didn't have to renovate. And about the only thing worth really saving was this access through the building that existed. And other important opportunities though were use of this pool, use of the mountains further beyond, connection to the main part of campus, this direction, to the dorms over here, other parts here. And the college wanted a new entrance at this intersection of their private street and the main public road. So with that, the program was tough. The site was pretty restricted. So we just developed a very clear-eyed attitude about how to organize the space. So obviously, you know, breaking out the program, not just in terms of plan, but in terms of section too. And then as we kind of started looking at, this is what we sort of finally developed, which was, you can kind of see the track, which you might have seen, the pool, the public road, the private road. We realized early on that we wanted the main basketball arena in the center. Did I mention this was, yeah, the gym. So in the center, and also a recreation gym next to it that would have the same size court, but not need to be as large. We then separated them and started thinking about a series of streets connecting all these elements. We raised the recreation gym up higher so that we could fit the fitness studios and weight room underneath it. And also we really had this idea about activating all the floors of the building, not just the first level. We started introducing streets on the second floor, what we called streets, and exterior connections. We added offices, a block of offices on the south side to have the best light. And then on the north side, we added a two-story fitness center, which again would overlook the pool and the mountains. And then finally we kind of tied it together with that void at the corner. We tied it together. That was the natural place for the entrance. And as it turned out, we did win the competition. It was interesting that we were the only ones that figured out how to get all the program on the site. And as one trustee, everybody else spilled out in areas where the college really didn't want them to build. And the other thing was that one trustee told me how the other competitors had put the coaches' offices, that were playing to the coaches by putting their offices here and giving them the best view, instead of putting the students there. And he actually said, well, what you did was kind of stupid, but it actually worked. And it occurred, and I said, I never even occurred to me not to give the students the best, the best part of the building. That was an interesting, contradictory lesson, because, and later on, as the site developed, it was on hold for 4 years during the recession. We pushed the level of the floor of the arena down into sort of a basement level, so you could walk in and then download into the seats. And that allowed us to kind of create this, what we call this ring of glass, all the way around the arena. And I think you'll see the effect of that in a second. So the final sort of the plan that we've been working with, so again, sort of lobby and main arena at the heart, and extending from the lobby these sort of wider streets with circulation and stairs, and it's all sort of connected with a lot of glass, so that from the moment you enter the lobby, you can kind of see into the fitness studio, you can see into the main basketball court. You actually can see it across and all the way to the outside on the other side. And we knew, that this building would be a new social center on campus. So throughout the project, or throughout the building, there are lots of little sort of spaces to set up casual furniture for casual studying and meetings and interactivity. It's just the way things are done these days. As you well know, I was over at your FAC a couple weeks ago at 10:30, and it was humming. So this is another view of the lobby, looking back towards the main entrance. We designed this, what we call this Y stair. Again, the idea was circulation that would kind of come up and and break off into certain different areas, and again create more of these sort of interactive social spaces, informal. Coming around, this was the kind of large street between the main arena over here, fitness studios over here, with again circulation down towards the arena, but also circulation crossing that up towards the balcony. The fitness center that sort of straddles the pool and the arena in a little corridor in between. And then the arena itself, again, I talked about that ring of light, so the whole thing has this light glass all the way around it to both see outside, but also other things happening inside. And then on these two sides, there's also glass that, again, allows views into the fitness center and to the coaches' offices. They get this special skybox. And then we can't quite really see it, but there's skylights, a good number of skylights in the roof to bring in a lot of natural light. And then here's kind of the view from the opposite side, diagonally, during, set up for during a game. It's an intimate kind of size gym. They say that mostly they'll only have 70 people watching a game, so it's not meant to be so big. It's meant to hold about 2,000 people when it's most packed, but that's only going to be 4 or 5 times a year. So that's why it's actually, you can see not a lot of space from here to here. From the outside, the kind of the form of it is sculptural, but in our feeling, we thought of it as more like athletic. So we wanted it to sort of communicate some of that kind of quality of what's going on inside. The reason they had a competition in the first place is they were looking for an iconic, what they called an iconic design. They're sort of punctuating their campus with a few. Most of it is kind of in a kind of traditional idiom, but they want to punctuate it with these buildings that they think will be more special and actually bring more people out to the college. And the cladding is terracotta, which also is punctuated by the kind of these horizontal bands of the school's color. From the new intersection, this is the view from that. Just kind of, you can kind of look into the recreation gym. It's facing west, so it has, again, speaking of sustainability, it's much more solid, so it's not overheated by the late afternoon sun. It will also be used into the weight rooms and things like that. Again, trying to interact, have the building, at least some of its activities, be able to be sort of seen from the surrounding city. And then at the swimming pool, we stepped the building down so as not to overcrowd the pool. And here, because we're facing north, we can have lots of glass and really take advantage of the views for this two-level fitness center. Last project is another kind of local competition for a new gateway into, well, not really into Koreatown. It's more like it kind of marks the center of Koreatown. And it's Olympic and Normandy. It's a pretty typical intersection for LA. Nothing truly exceptional about it, except for they do have this one park with this pavilion that was built at a community center, which also has this kind of traditional nod. It's a pretty, not very nice, but traditional structure. But then the rest of it is just kind of standard stuff. And what we really wanted to do is we wanted this thing to be big and commanding, so it wouldn't get lost in all this mess. We wanted it to be spatial, and we wanted it to be interactive. Of course, we tried a lot of things, but we ultimately settled on this kind of hybrid steel beam and cable structure that you see here, 50 feet tall, which again kind of commands that intersection. There was some idea of it being kind of related to some Korean characters, and it did have this quality of in sort of form, sort of softness of form, being somewhat related to the traditional structures, which I suppose, well, I know actually helped us actually get the project. We're working again with Borough Hackle to sort of. It's pretty hard to make something this tall and cantilever that far out over the street. We had to get special permission from the Department of Transportation, who hasn't said yes, but they haven't said no. And I think that's the way it's going to go. And then we were also kind of, we were in fact inspired by sort of the color and the lightness and the lights of traditional Asian architecture and celebrations and dress. And so it's just so natural that these cables would accommodate LEDs. And so that we can begin to use those LEDs again to create changing images, and we're kind of studying all this spacing for that now. So that, and working with a couple artists to begin to kind of program these the images that can kind of be put on there. And we're studying it at daytime on the right-hand side, and dusk over there on the left, and then at nighttime, which is this latest image. So that's the last project, and if anybody has questions, that's great. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of trajectory of starting your own office and doing the little projects and custom making all these things and working with builders and getting bigger and wanting to have that kind of control and sort of home build, I don't know, quality, but also still working on larger projects with bigger contractors and more off-the-shelf stuff. And it's great to come back to something like this every so often. Well, actually as often as I can get my hands on this, I want to do this. But to kind of continue working at these different scales, it keeps your work fresh, it keeps you, learning and thinking and all of that. So thank you.